Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. All right, welcome back, everybody. It's Friday, August 6th, episode 27 of the Near Memo. As always, I'm Greg, and I'm here with Mike and David. We're going to talk about everything in the world of local search, commerce, and so on. Or not everything, but things that we think are important this week.
And SMB.
And SMB, thank you. And that's a big feature of this week's discussion. And I'm going to kick it off with two items tied to Yelp. The first, well, before I begin, do either of you want to say anything? No? Okay.
Thanks for joining us yet again.
Yet again.
Over to you, Greg.
All right. Okay. So Yelp this week announced its Q2 revenues, and they announced a surprise profit. Their stock jumped 14%. They grew revenue after hours the other day, and they grew revenue, I think, 52%.
So that's 52% over 2020, right?
Yes.
Which I think is a critical comparison because it's not a very
right.
It's an
not
easy
a high
comparison.
bar. Not a high
bar. That's right.
Yes. Okay. And then they also introduced two new business attributes for their profiles. One was proof of vaccination required for admission, and all staff vaccinated, which is I think interesting. I think Google's going to mimic that probably, because I think now with the Delta variant and the sort of seriousness of that and how contagious it is, I think it's
and with all these businesses going in that direction, Google, Facebook, all agreeing that people need to be vaccinated to come back on site.
Right. I think the confusing thing, though, is that, and this is why it's valuable as a profile attribute, is that it depending on where you are in the country and depending on what business category you're in, the rules are going to be very different. There's no uniformity. So in Florida, there are going to be no masks, no vaccine requirements. California, New York, and elsewhere, vaccine rules will be more prevalent. And so it's going to be really valuable to have this information. What were you going to say, Mike?
Well, just that from a logical point of view, every business needs to get to that point where they're actually requiring vaccines, because the businesses are, again, caught in the middle here. If they don't have rigorous enough standards and it leads to a super spreader event amongst their customers or their employees, the business is going to take it on the chin, maybe not legally, but certainly socially and financially. And I think that the business, from a business case point of view only, let's leave out the moral issues. A business needs to get to this point. And I think it's good that all these major innovative American businesses have done that. Disney, Netflix, even Walmart has done it, along with Google and Facebook and a number of others, more coming every day. In fact, CNN fired 3 employees who violated the all vaccinated in the office rule. And I think that that's going to become the norm in most businesses that don't want to get caught flat-footed from a PR point of view.
Well, except in jurisdictions where everybody is in certain places where people are hostile to vaccines.
Well, my research would indicate that the most it's 20% are hostile. That still leaves 80% that aren't, right? So, there's some people who are undecided, but they're not hostile to a vaccine or a safe, high hygienic protocol. It's like,
well, there's a difference between masks required for admission and vaccine proof required for admission, right?
Right. Well, I'm talking about employees, and certainly when you get to the question of customers, it's a more nuanced question.
I think for employees, it's a very easy call, right? If you're going to bring people into an indoor environment in these circumstances, you need to be vaccinated.
I think that's done everything you could to maximize your hygiene, right?
And that's legally permissible. Courts have ruled on it. There's no ambiguity there. Where it becomes a much harder question, I think, is for the business owner to require this and enforce this. In New York, there are going to be potential fines for businesses that fail in the requisite categories to enforce this or are lax in their enforcement. So non-compliance or lax enforcement will result in fines.
In New York City.
In New York, yes.
But the rest of New York State, our hospital proclaimed how successful they were because 72% of their staff were vaccinated. I looked at that news report and thought more than 1 out of 4 of their staff workers are not vaccinated. The hospital becomes a super spreader event themselves in Delta.
Yes. Well,
right?
And that's And that's
And-
going to happen with the schools opening. I mean, I have a 16-year-old who's going back to high school next week, and they're going to have masks, but there's no way they're going to prevent the spread of given the sort of contagiousness of the Delta variant. There's absolutely no way that that's going to not sort of tear through those environments.
And then they interviewed our local mayor, and he was concerned that if New York State made it mandatory, it would be an unfunded mandate. And I'm thinking, death by COVID is an unfunded mandate. The feds are paying for COVID vaccines. COVID vaccination of employees is not an unfunded mandate. And then the mayor in the next city over said, oh, I've never even asked our employees. It's against HIPAA. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I live right in the third world, the middle of a third world country.
Well, okay, all right.
Back to the Yelp report.
Back to the Yelp report. So I'm glad that Yelp put that attribute in place, and I agree with you that Google will as well.
Yeah. So the attribute is helpful from the standpoint that there's going to be a lot of confusion, and secondly, some people will use this as a way to determine who to patronize, and so I think it's
true.
Yeah. So I think it's a really valuable. Thing. Now,
I was actually going to highlight a couple things from the earnings report, though, if I could.
Well, let me just finish out the vaccine attribute, and then we can go to earnings. So one of the things that comes with any kind of public COVID display is review bombing, right? Because it's such a hot button issue, and Yelp said that they've experienced something like 600% increase in sort of dubious reviews tied to ideological issues like, masks and vaccination. And they said that they've removed 4,500 reviews. I don't remember what period of time this was as a result of that. Now, what's interesting to me is that, just the phenomenon of review bombing becomes a big problem. But that they've only removed 4,500 reviews suggests that the review volume in the aggregate is pretty low, right? Because it would be 45,000 or 4,500,000 if it were Google, I think.
Right. We will know that as soon as they release their 10Q for the quarter. I've been tracking their review volume for the last 8 years, and it's been generally, the rate of growth has been decreasing. It's been, but we'll see. We don't know yet. They didn't release that in their conversations yesterday.
Well, David, why don't we go to, I could say some things editorially about quantity versus quality, but let's go to you, David.
Sure. So there were a couple of interesting things in their report, one of which is they seem to be diversifying revenue away from restaurants and retail, which my first thought looking at these numbers was, oh, yeah, of course, retail spending's off the charts in Q2 because everybody's going back, as we talked about, I think, last week on the Near Memo. But Yelp seems to be diversifying into more and more categories, which is good for them as a business.
They refer to it as services, though. What does that mean? Does that mean lawyers and doctors?
Could be, or home services.
Home services is one of their big categories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then the other thing was, it seemed like they were growing growing the share of revenue from national brands, which I think has always been a better, more viable path for them in terms of customers who don't necessarily hate Yelp right off the bat, which most small businesses do. So I think in some ways, yes, enterprise sales are a lot harder, but it seems like for Yelp, it might actually be an easier path to grow revenue, and they seem to be somewhat successful at doing that. The third thing I don't have an explanation for, but it seems like they have decreased the cost per click or cost per action or whatever their metrics are on ads, but have actually increased the revenues from those ads. So that also tells me that maybe they're lowering their minimum spend for SMBs, or that they're cutting amazing deals with these national brands to get more of them on board. Either one of which I would fully support, having worked with a couple of on the SMB side anyway, where the minimums just did not make any sense relative to the declining traffic to Yelp, as Mike has been pointing out. So,
right. Yeah, they had a 40% increase in paying advertising locations, which is a pretty significant increase. And the other point there, David, back to your revenue diversification, was the increased revenue from self-serve, which I think is in the SMB category. Again, if an SMB self-serves in that, they're less likely to be pissed at some salesman that hard sold them.
Yeah, and I wonder what that means. Is that just ads, or does that include some of their paid products that are not ads?
Correct. don't know.
So
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.